Welcome back to the Windy City MMA YouTube channel. I am Jordan. Unfortunately, Lewis could not make it today, so this will just be me. This is my UFC Noche Lopez versus Silva breakdown and predictions. We will start at the bottom per usual and get through it. First fight of the night, we have Rodrigo Sezinando versus Daniil Donchenko. Now, this is the tough final matchup from UFC 319 that got pushed back to Noche here. So this was supposed to happen, but now it is, or it was supposed to happen at 319. Now it is happening here at UFC Noche due to an injury on the Rodrigo side. So Rodrigo is 8-1 with his only loss coming, or I guess 9-1 on the screen here, with his only loss coming in 2022 by decision. He most recently fought in the Samurai MMA for a fight, but the BFL or Battlefield Fight League before coming into the tough. Daniil, on the other hand, is 11-2, but it says 12-2 on this screen, most recently fighting in the Nazia Fighting Championship before tough. Like I said, these two were supposed to fight at 319, and on that card, I picked Daniil Donchenko to win, and I'm going to stay with the same pick. I'm picking Daniil. I think he's just better everywhere. I'm not entirely sure if it will be a finish or not, but I think he could be a good parlay piece with his money line at minus 225. It's not crazy. Odds might have moved a little bit since the last time I checked, but that is where I am at. So, we will move. Next, we have Montserrat Rendon versus Alice Pereira. Alice Pereira is 5-0. Says 0-0 on there, but 5-0 on Tapology. Most recently fighting at Cage Monsters FC. She's sitting at a minus 175 favorite, going up against Montserrat Rendon, who is 6-1 and 1-1 in the UFC. Most recently losing to Daria Zelenikova. I definitely botched that one by decision, though, in March of last year. She's currently sitting at the plus 145 underdog. I'm going to go with the favorite here, Alice Pereira. You know, she has 4 finishes and 5 wins on the regional scene, and I like to see that for someone making their UFC debut, especially when it comes to women's MMA. Decently close odds as well, so I think I might take her to win a decision. As I like to say, you know, the favorite by decision is usually a pretty good bet in these types of matchups, but I have no bet yet on that. We will move. Alessandro Costa versus Alden Coria. So in our next matchup, you know, here Alessandro Costa is 14-4, 2-2 in the UFC. He's most recently coming off a round 2 KO win against Kevin Borjas, and he is currently sitting at a minus 455 favorite. He's going to get up against Alden Coria, who is 10-3, but it says 0-0 on the UFC website, making his UFC debut. Most recently fighting in Fury FC. He's on a 3-fight win streak with 1 no contest as well. He's currently sitting at a plus 350 underdog. I'm going to go with the favorite here, you know, in Alessandro Costa. Costa's only 29 years old, and in his 4 UFC fights, has fought some pretty good competition, you know. His 2 UFC losses come from Amir Albazi in Costa's UFC debut and Steve Erceg a couple years ago. You know, and his KO win against Borjas came in his last fight in May of last year. And I kind of regard Borjas as a good fighter. You know, I think he's pretty decent. So I think his level competition has been really good. And he'll start himself a little win streak. Obviously, I'm not crazy about the minus 450 line. I never like when someone's that crazy of a favorite. But I might take him. I'm not going to touch him now. Maybe later in the week, maybe as a parlay piece. Now we move. Zachary Reese against Sedriques Dumas. Zachary Reese is 9-2, 3-2 in the UFC, most recently coming off a decision win against Dusko Todorovic, who is fighting later on this card. He currently sits as a minus 238 favorite, going up against Sedriques Dumas, who is 10-3, 3-3 in the UFC, and most recently losing by first round knockout to fighting nerd Mikhail Olechechuk. So Sedriques was supposed to fight Jackson McVeigh a couple months ago, but it got canceled due to Dumas not being able to get in front of a judge in time to see or to get his ankle monitor cut off. Or so I've seen. He's currently sitting at a plus 195 underdog. Now, to be completely honest, I don't really know why Sedriques is still in the UFC. I don't actually think he's bad. I think he's decent or okay everywhere when it comes to fighting. But his out of the ring antics, kind of qualify for him getting cut. Dude has been arrested so many times. So that being said, against Dumas, I actually do think this could be a very good fight. Could be a scrap. I lean Reese though because I think he's a little better everywhere with more power. And when the lines come out, I'm going to take a look and see what the fight to end by submission looks like. Both these guys can sub people. Reese does like himself a little jiu-jitsu now and then, and so does Dumas. You can see it in their fights. Now, neither of these guys have been getting submission recently, but both can. So I do think this could be a good prop look. I think the odds could be pretty decent. So I'm going to take a look at that, and I might take that later on when the odds actually come out. So, or maybe the fight does not go the distance. But picking a side, I am going to pick Zachary Reese. I just think he's better. We are going to move Jesus Aguilar versus Luis Gurule. So Jesus Aguilar is 11-3, 3-2 in the UFC, most recently coming off a decision loss to Rafael Estevam. He currently sits at the underdog odds, plus 165. I believe the odds might have switched a little bit, but that is where, plus 185, sorry. He's fighting Luis Gurule, who's 10-1, 0-1 in the UFC, most recently coming off the second round KO loss to Ode Osborne in his UFC debut. He currently sits at the minus 225 favorite. Now, normally I do like to pick guys that are fighting their second fight in the UFC after losing their debut. But I think I'm going to go with the underdog here. I'm going to go with Aguilar. He's from Mexico, which sort of means something for UFC Noche. Not really, to be honest. I kind of thought the odds would be a little bit closer, maybe closer to a pick'em. He's the UFC vet and he's younger. So I'm gonna pick him here. Luis got knocked out by Ode Osborne, who continually shows he can be beat, but he is extremely tough. But I'm gonna go with Aguilar because I have to pick a side here. But I don't think I'll be betting it, to be completely honest with you. But I'm gonna pick the side of Jesus Aguilar. We will move. Tatiana Suarez versus Amanda Lemos. Tatiana Suarez is 11-1 or 10-1, I believe. 7-1 in the UFC. She's most recently coming off that decision loss to the champion Zhang Weili. She's currently sitting at a heavy minus 440 favorite in this fight, going up against Amanda Lemos, who's 15-4-1 or 9-4 in the UFC, most recently coming off a great decision win over Yasmin Lucindo. She's currently sitting at the plus 340 underdog. Now I'm going to go with Tatiana Suarez in this fight. It's kind of scary, but I think she'll get a dominant bounce back, probably decision win, after her title loss. Suarez is 34 and Lemos is 38, so neither of them are extremely young. But in terms of MMA fights, Tatiana Suarez is a lot younger in fight years. So I do think she does wrestle Lemos to death, probably getting a decision win. She's a huge favorite though, so I don't think I will be playing her. But maybe we'll see what a decision line comes or looks like, or maybe a submission line. We'll kind of see what those look like. But I'm going to pick Tatiana Suarez as a side. We move. Claudio Puelles versus Joaquim Silva. Claudio Puelles is 13-4, 5-3 in the UFC, and most recently coming off a split decision loss to Ferreira. The fight's currently about a pick'em, with Puelles being a slight underdog at minus 108. He goes up against Joaquim Silva. Silva is 13-6, 6-5 in the UFC, most recently coming off a decision loss to Drakkar Klose. He's the very slight favorite at minus 112. The fight is essentially a pick'em. Now I'm going to go with the slight underdog here. I'm going to go with Claudio Puelles. I think, he could just win on optics, maybe taking Silva down or holding him down or using his jiu-jitsu. Puelles is coming off back-to-back losses to Dan Hooker and Fressian, which aren't bad losses to have. Uh, Now, Silva does have the better comp, but Puelles is 7 years younger, and I think he'll win this fight. I'm not too confident, but maybe a small play on him because the odds are so close. But again, one that I'm not crazy confident in. A lot of these fights I'm not too confident in here. But we'll move. Dusko Todorovic versus Jose Daniel Medina. Dusko Todorovic is 12-6, 3-6 in the UFC, and most recently coming off a decision loss to Zach Reese, who fights earlier on this card. He's on a three-fight losing streak in the UFC currently and sits at a minus 310 favorite. He fights Jose Medina, who is 11-5 and 0-2 in the UFC, most recently coming off a first-round KO loss to Ateba Gutierrez. He's also on a three-fight losing streak, including Dana White's Contender Series, and he sits at a plus 250 dog right now. So both these guys very well may be fighting for their jobs in the UFC. Now, I think the odds are extremely wide in this fight for two guys coming off three-fight losing streaks. But I'm going to go with Dusko in this fight. I think he'll probably win a decision. I think his losses age a little better. A lot of his losses are guys that have been winning or are winning more now after their fights. Both decision losses to Zachary Reese, who, as I said, fights earlier on the card. But I think Dusko did a little bit better. He actually landed a similar amount of strikes compared to getting doubled up like Jose Medina did. So give me Dusko Todorovic. Not too confident in the fact that I don't like the odds. I think the odds are way too wide. We move to Alexander Hernandez versus Diego Ferreira. You know, Alexander Hernandez is 17-8, 9-7 in the UFC, but on a three-fight win streak, and most recently winning a first-round knockout against Chase Hooper at UFC 319 last month, which we were at in person and got to see that close up. He's making a quick turnaround in this fight, and he's a minus 140 favorite right now. Might be a little bit wider, actually. He's going up against Diego Ferreira. Diego's 16-6, or it says 19-6 here. 10-6 in the UFC, most recently coming off a decision loss to Grant Dawson. He's currently a plus 122 underdog in this fight. I'm going with the Great Ape. I'm going with Alexander Hernandez in this fight. He's on a three-fight win streak, just ran through Chase Hooper, seems to be entering his prime a little bit here at 32 years old. Ferreira's 40 years old, and although he won a couple good ones before his Dawson loss, I think Hernandez may just be too much for him in this fight. So I'm taking Hernandez, but I don't think I will have any bets on it. I'm not really sure what kind of method we're looking at here. But I'm going to take the Great Ape. Give me Alexander Hernandez to win this fight. Now we move to the main card opener. Main card opener of Santiago Luna versus Quang Lee. Now, Santiago Lima is 6-0, unlike the 0-0 it says on his record here. Making his UFC debut, all 6 of his professional wins have come by finish, 2 KOs, 4 subs, and he's currently the slight favorite at minus 122. He goes up against Quang Lee. Quang Lee's 9-2, or 1-2 in the UFC, and most recently coming off a round 2 submission win against Gaston Bolanos. He's currently the slight underdog at plus 102. The odds are very similar to his last fight against Bolanos, which he won. But I'm going to pick Santiago Luna here. I don't usually pick debut fighters, but I think I'm going to take him. I think Quang Lee's very tough, but Luna's one of the very few Mexican fighters on UFC Noche, at least in terms of, up-and-comers. Especially since we lost Raul Rosas. But we got David Martinez, foreshadowing there. I think it kind of means something to have him as the main card opener. Even though truly it doesn't, but I think it kind of does. I think the UFC might want to showcase him a little bit and build another star. They did it with Nuerji against Crosby at UFC Shanghai. They had a UFC debutant fighting someone on the main card opener. He got a nice first round win, and I think it could look very similar here. But maybe an early submission or something like that, or he just wins the fight. Either way, I'm taking Santiago Luna to win this fight. We move up the main card to Kelvin Gastelum versus Dustin Stolfitz. So Kelvin Gastelum is 20 and 10 here, 13 and 10 in the UFC, and he's coming off that decision loss to Joe Pyfer where he got cracked. He's currently the minus 265 favorite, and he's fighting Dustin Stolfitz, who is 16 and 7 or 3 and 6 in the UFC, most recently coming off a decision loss to Nursultan Ruzaboyev. And he currently sits at a plus 215 underdog. I'm taking Kelvin here. I'm taking Kelvin. He has an iron chin, and although Piper did crack it very bad, he didn't break it. I don't think Dustin hits harder than Piper, to finish it off. Maybe he can, because maybe Piper did a lot of damage in terms of his ability to still have that chin. But we'll see. Maybe this fight just doesn't go the distance. Maybe Gastelum finds the KO because he hits pretty hard too. He's always down to scrap. Stolfitz has been KO'd a lot in the UFC. He also has a lot of KOs. But like I said, I don't believe he'll be the one to actually KO Kelvin unless Piper really did that damage, but just couldn't finish him off. So give me Kelvin. I don't know if I'll be taking his money line. Maybe if fight doesn't go the distance, maybe a KO prop. I'm not too sure yet. I'm not too sure, but I'm going to take Kelvin Gastelum on the money line for my pick. Moving up again, Rafa Garcia versus Jared Gordon. Jared Gordon is 21 and 7 or 9 and 6 in the UFC, most recently coming off a first round KO win against Thiago Moises. He currently sits at the minus 278 favorite. He's fighting Rafa Garcia, who's 17 and 4 or 5 and 4 in the UFC, and coming off a decision win against Vince Pichel. He's currently a plus 255 underdog. I am taking Jared Gordon in this fight. Jared Gordon is technically only on a one fight win streak, but it could be 6 when you take a look at the matchups. A lot of people thought he won the Pimlet fight, then the Green no contest where he was winning. He won the next fight, and then he lost the split decision to Montserrat Haxaprax, however you say his name, which I thought he won the fight, just like a lot of people did as well. So he could be on a huge win streak, It seems like he's on a resurgence, and honestly, he only has losses against great competition, and I don't think he lost to Nazareth, so I don't count him. So give me Jared Gordon to win this fight. I'm not too sure how, and I'm not too sure if it's going to be a knockout or a decision, but I'm going to take Jared Gordon as the favorite to win. We will move to the co-main event of the evening. Rob Font versus David Martinez. Rob Font is 22 and 8, 12 and 7 in the UFC, and coming off a split decision win against John Matsumoto. And Kyler Phillips before that. A prospect killer recently. He currently sits at the minus 140 favorite, and the line seems to be moving against him. Seems to be like he is turning more into the underdog. Now he's fighting David Martinez. Martinez is 12 and 1, 1 and 0 in the UFC, and coming off his first round KO win against Simon Oliveira in his debut in March. He currently sits at the plus 120 underdog, with again the odds slightly moving towards him. I'm taking David Martinez in this fight. I actually bet him already at plus 180 a couple days ago before the movement. I like him as underdog odds in general, Martinez is a good Mexican boxer with 10 of his 12 wins coming by knockout. Now, I don't know if he'll be able to knock out Rob Font as he hasn't been knocked out. So I don't know if Martinez will be the one to do that, but I do think he will win the exchanges on the feet and he could pick up a decision win here. So I'm going to take David Martinez most likely by decision, but I'm going to take his money line. We will move to the main event of the evening, Diego Lopes versus Jean Silva. Jean Silva is 16 and 2 or 5 and 0 in the UFC, coming off a round 2 submission win against Bryce Mitchell at UFC 314 in April. He currently sits the minus 265 favorite, with those odds moving a little bit away from him as well, kind of moving towards the Diego side. Diego Lopes sits at 26 and 7 or 5 and 2 in the UFC, and he's coming off a decision loss to the champ Alexander Volkanovski, also at UFC 314. He sits at the plus 215 underdog. This is a big fight, man. Now, I think these odds are a little bit wide, but I am going to go with Jean Silva here. The big four of the fighting nerds are unfortunately on a 2-fight losing streak after going 0-2 last week at UFC Paris. But I think Jean picks up a win here. Um, Obviously Lopez is very, very good. He had an amazing fight against Movsar Evloev in his debut and has just been looking good ever since. He had a decent fight against Alexander Volkanovski, especially later in the fight. Um, but I think Diego might just get hit too much, and he has shown to have a great chin. But I think Jean might have some different type of power and could probably put him down. Diego got hurt early by Volk, and I think if Volk can do that right now, I think Jean can probably do that as well. So Jean has been knocking out everyone recently, submitting a submission guy, knocking everyone else out. He seems to be on a mission, and I don't think it stops this weekend. He has an insane story. He's been through so much, and I think it continues. I think he could crack Diego early, get him out of there. That being said, if this fight goes late, like it did the Volk fight, maybe Lopez can make a comeback later. But I'm not too sure if it's gonna. So I'm gonna go with Jean Silva. I'm gonna go with Jean Silva to win this fight. If I had to pick, I would say second round knockout. Give me Jean Silva. So thank you guys for watching. That is our UFC Noche Lopez versus Silva breakdown. I hope you guys all enjoyed. Until next time, see you later.